People keep asking what really happened on the ring line. They ask like it's gossip or trivia, like they're trying to remember the name of a movie. I get it. It's easier to say it like that. Makes it smaller. Keeps it in a box so you can shove it under a bed and pretend it isn't there when you sleep. I used to talk that way too. I used to share the story for drinks and laughs, nodding along, correcting the parts everyone got wrong. Then the last winter happened, and the story stopped being a story. Now it's a weight I carry around. And the only reason I'm telling it is because I want someone to know I didn't go looking for this. I wasn't hunting legends. I was just tired and bored, and I wanted to feel like my life was bigger than it was. You know the ring line even if you don't think you do. The train that loops the city and doesn't bother to pretend it's pretty. The stations that smell like old rain and metal. The posters that curl off the tiles. The benches with that cold, greasy touch, like they've been handled by 1,000 hands and wiped by none. I rode it every day to work at the night desk of a building where most of the tenants were lawyers, and none of them knew my name. I watched revolving doors spin and accepted packages, and tried to keep my eyes open between midnight and morning. That was most of my day. Ring line there, night desk, ring line back, bed. I first heard the legend from a kid named Marco, who mopped the lobby on the weekends. He wore headphones even when he wasn't listening to anything, and he had that voice that's always on the edge of laughter. We were watching the rain turn the street into one long reflection when he said, "You ever seen the extra platform?" I said, "What extra platform?" "On the ring line. Between Northcrest and Weaver. There's a place the train slows like it's going to stop, but the doors don't open. If you look out the window, there's a platform, but it's not one of ours. Old tiles, green and white. No ads. Some people say you can see folks waiting there. Not many. Like 2 or 3. If you wave, they wave back. If you stare, they stare. If the train actually stops, don't get off." I said that was the dumbest thing I'd heard all week, and asked him if this was a TikTok thing. He swore it wasn't. He said his cousin's girlfriend saw it and started sleeping with the lights on. He said there used to be a maintenance guy at Northcrest who put tape over the windows in certain cars because of it. He said, "They call it the missing platform." That was the first name I heard. Later I'd hear other names, and I began to understand that whatever this thing was, it had been out there long enough to collect nicknames the way a river collects trash. The dead step, the breath station, the green stop. People always think if you name something, you control it. That's not how it works. A week after Marco told me, I started riding with my phone camera against the glass between Northcrest and Weaver. I wasn't hunting anything. I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't real, or I wanted to catch it on video and send it to him with a dumb caption and get a laugh. I don't know. I needed something to break up the dark. Mostly I got smears of light and my own reflection. If you've ever filmed out a train window, you know the look. Like a slow storm behind glass. I watched those clips on my break at 3 in the morning, back when I still drank the coffee we made in the lobby machine. Back when that didn't make my hands shake. One night I saw something. The train shuddered in that patch of tunnel where it always felt like the floor dipped for no reason. My camera caught a line of pale tiles sliding by and a black shape like a doorway. It was quick, a frame or two. But there it was, a place. I rewound. I stepped through frame by frame with my thumb. Tiles, doorway, maybe a sign above the doorway, a shadow of letters. Then it was gone and the dirty concrete was back. I showed Marco. He stopped kidding. He asked me to airdrop it. He watched it 5 times in a row and then said, "Don't play with this." I told him it was nothing. He told me to stop riding in the first car. He said if the train stopped there, and I got curious, I'd do something stupid. I told him I wasn't stupid. The next night the train slowed between Northcrest and Weaver, and the lights dipped. Everyone looked up at the same time like we were all strung together by one wire. I looked out, and I saw the platform. It wasn't a trick of light. It was there as solid as anything else in the city. The tiles were green with a white border. The letters under the grime were curled and old-fashioned, like the font on a soda bottle, and they spelled out mercy. There was a black bench with a chipped back and a glass case that once held a map, but only held paper dust now. Across from the bench stood 3 people. I noticed the way people stand when they think they're alone. Shoulders dropped, hands in pockets, chins down. They didn't look at us. They looked at the tracks like they were trying to see where they went. We rolled past. The train didn't stop. The doors didn't chime. I held my phone so tight my fingers went numb. At work I told myself I'd seen an unused platform and that was all. The city was full of half-finished things. It was full of places where one plan had gone bankrupt and another had been bolted over the top. Maybe they'd built Mercy and decided to move it 2 blocks over and call it Weaver instead. Maybe it was a service area. I went down an internet hole. Old articles. Message boards with colors that gave me a headache. Photos of workers in wide-legged pants from 100 years ago holding shovels like rifles. I found a map that showed a planned stop called Mercy, near where the hospital used to be, before they knocked it down and built that high school with the glass gym. There was a note in small type about the stop being canceled due to a fire in the scaffolding during construction that killed 2 men and injured a 3rd. After that, the funds went somewhere else. The city moved on. No mention of a platform being built anyway. Tiled and named and left under the city like a forgotten tomb. I printed the map at the building's copier and stuck it in the back of my locker behind a sweater I never wore. I told myself I was done. The ring line would stop being a ghost story and go back to being the ride to my paycheck. The murders started after that. Whether it was related, I still don't know. I know what I saw and what happened to the people around me. I know the timing. I know the bad feeling that sat in my stomach like a fist. The first one was a man who ran a newsstand at Weaver Station. He was one of those guys who looks like he's always laughing even when he isn't. He knew everyone's soda preference, and he let kids keep the change if they brought him a good grade to show off. He was found in the storage closet behind his stand. The door was locked from the inside, and there was a pile of cardboard against it, which made the cops say it was an accident at first. A fall. He had a deep wound across his throat, and his hands were cut up like he'd grabbed for something sharp that he couldn't pull away from. That last detail is my memory. It's what I heard someone say at a bar, that the backs of his fingers were sliced through the knuckles. I'm not going to tell it more than that. The newsstand was closed the next morning with police tape and a note that said, "Back soon." People stood around and shook their heads and said his name like it was a password. There was a chalk mark near the closet door that I could not stop looking at. It was the shape of a shoe. Someone made a joke about ghosts. It hit the ground like a dropped plate. If that had been the only one, maybe people would have said the city got him, the way it gets all of us eventually. Maybe the chalk would have faded, and the stand would have reopened with a new guy who didn't know anybody's soda preference. We don't get to live in that world. A week later, a woman who did translation work for the firm upstairs from my desk didn't make it home. She was found at the bottom of the stairwell in her building with her key still in her hand. She had a wound like the newsstand owner. That was in the article. They didn't say much else. I floated through those days. I drank the lobby coffee again, and it didn't help. I stopped riding in the first car. I stood in the middle like everyone else, trying to blend into a crowd that was smaller than usual. People were driving more. I could feel it in the way the cars looked at each other at intersections, like they were tense. Rumors sprouted like weeds. Someone said the killer was a woman who hated anybody who wore headphones. Someone said it was a man who only went for people with red shoes. Someone said it was two people working together, a couple that ran a bakery in the day and hunted at night. The thing about fear is that it breeds stories the way damp walls breed mold. The stories make you feel smart for a day or two, and then they sour, and all you have left is the smell. I told Marco to stop taking late trains. He said he couldn't. He didn't have a car. He lived near the old hospital site, near the glass gym of the high school. He said he could almost hear the trains in his apartment on quiet nights. He said when he closed his eyes, he could see the word mercy, like it was burned into them. I didn't tell him about the map in my locker. I didn't tell him about seeing the platform or the people on it. I told him to keep his head up and stay near the conductor if he could. He laughed at that. Officers ride for free, he said. Conductors get hit like the rest of us. There was a man I used to see on the ring line after my shift. He wore a gray jacket with a missing button, and he always had a paperback in his hand. He rode 3 stops and got off at Weaver. Sometimes he fell asleep and missed it, and I'd have to nudge him. He'd blink, thank me, and get off at the next one, which meant he'd have to walk back a long way. He had a calm face. I envied him that. One morning, after a shift where the heating made a noise like a throat clearing every half hour, the man with the paperback stood up before Weaver as usual. The train slowed at that dip before Mercy. The lights fluttered. He looked out the window at the platform the way you look at an old photo in a shop window. The train stopped. No chime. No announcement. It just stopped with that soft shove that says nothing's wrong. The doors opened. No one moved at first. A woman near the door made a small sound and put her hand on her child's chest like a seatbelt. The man with the paperback looked at me. I didn't know him, but we'd shared 100 quiet mornings. He had that same calm face. He put the book in his jacket pocket, squeezed the edge of the door, and stepped onto the Mercy platform. A handful of people said, "Hey." One guy reached out like he might grab the man's sleeve. No one did. We watched him. That is a truth I hate. We watched him like he was a dog off leash. The platform smelled colder than our car. I could feel it even through the gap. The man looked up at the old sign. He rubbed his cheek like he had an itch. He walked past the bench and the empty glass case. He turned and gave a little shrug like this was a mistake and he'd be right back. The doors closed. The train started. It was like when you put your hand out to catch a glass and your fingers brush it and you miss. A few people pounded the door. Someone swore. Someone laughed a hard laugh that cut off quick. We rolled into Weaver and everyone spilled out and looked down the tunnel toward where Mercy would be if it existed in any regular way, which it doesn't. I stood on the platform so long, a station agent asked if I needed help. I said a man got off between stations. The agent looked at me like I was inviting him into a stupid conversation, and he said, "Then he's trespassing," and told me to move along. I waited the next morning on the same car, the same seat if I could get it. I felt like a kid who broke something and tried to fix it with glue. It's not mine to fix. If you need me to say I should have pulled him back or shouted or done something more than I did, fine. Say it. Put it on me. It already is. After that, the murders got bolder. That's the word the news used. A bus driver was taken from his route at night. His bus was found idling with the door open and a scratched line running the length of it. A young couple renting a basement suite never showed up to work, and their landlord found the door unlocked, the table set for breakfast, and a trail where the salt spilled across the counter like white sand. The article mentioned a mark above the doorframe that looked like a letter. They never said which letter. I stopped reading the articles. I stopped counting how many. I started counting how many people were not around anymore. The woman who made my sandwich at the place near the station had her hair in a knot and called me boss, even when I told her not to. One day she wasn't there, and the guy who took her shift said she moved to another location. I didn't ask which. I went to the copier and took down the map and folded it along the original creases. I told myself I'd throw it away, and then I couldn't. I put it back. There was a thread of talk about mercy bubbling under everything else. I caught it in line at the pharmacy. I heard it at the desk when tenants pretended not to see me and talked like I wasn't there. Did you hear they were trying to open an old platform? My uncle says there's a station nobody uses, and they're going to use it for deliveries. I heard there was a strike years ago, and they bricked up a stop and now it's cracking. I found an account online that posted old plans and photos of the ring line. The owner called themselves Station Rat. They had grainy shots of the Mercy tiles and a blurry picture of the bench. In the comments, people argued about whether it was photoshopped. Station Rat posted an image of a sign, a metal rectangle with an arrow pointing left, painted over but not enough to hide the letters. Hospital. In the corner of the frame, there was a smear of something that could have been rust or something else. I messaged Station Rat. I told them I commuted that way and had seen the stop. I asked if there was a way to access it on foot. They wrote back with a single sentence. Please don't look for it. I stared at that for a long time. It felt like a dare. Not the kind where your friends push you across a line, but the kind where the line pulls at you on its own. I didn't go looking. I want you to hear that. I didn't go with a flashlight and a crowbar to pry open locked doors. I didn't make a plan to explore. I went to work. I saw the stop when I saw it. I didn't step off. I tried to be good. But I started keeping track. I kept a notebook in my locker. I wrote down which car I took, where I stood, whether the train slowed, whether the doors opened, whether I saw anyone on the platform. I tried to be a camera. I thought if I could be precise, I could be safe. That's dumb, but it's the kind of dumb that looks like sense. The brain loves a list more than it loves anything else. The pattern I saw after a month was this. Mercy showed up more often when the train was less crowded. It showed up more often in the early morning when the sky looked the same color as the tiles. If the temperature outside dropped, the train was more likely to slow. None of that proves anything. It just gave me the feeling of a shape. People say it's lonely to ride at that hour. They mean there aren't a lot of bodies. That's true. But there's a different loneliness when there are some bodies. When there are 6 of you scattered across a car built for 100, everyone becomes too large, like you're standing in a half-furnished room. You see each other's shoes. You hear each other breathe. You start to watch for the same things and look away at the same time. It was on a morning like that when Mercy came clear and the doors slid back with a soft sigh, and a man in a heavy coat stepped in from the platform. He looked like he'd been standing still for a very long time. His hair had the clumped look rain gives it, but it wasn't raining. He carried nothing. He stood near the door and turned his head slow, taking us in. His eyes were dull, like the part of a spoon that never gets polished. Nobody said anything. Nobody asked where he came from. We all just made space around him like he was a wet umbrella. We rolled on. The doors closed. The man didn't move. At Weaver, he stepped off and I almost followed him, but my legs didn't agree. I watched him walk toward the stairs without looking up at the sign. I watched him from the window as the doors shut again. He turned left at the top of the steps. I lost him in the crowd. That night, the building's service elevator stalled. The repair guy propped the doors open with a metal bar, and a couple of us peered down the shaft at the darkness like idiots. The night went on. The heat coughed. Around 3, a woman walked through the lobby and set her bag on my desk. She wore a simple black coat and her hair was cut blunt along her jaw. She showed me an ID. It said she worked for City Transit. I didn't catch her name. She said, "Has anyone from the maintenance staff seen anything unusual on their commute?" I said, "You'll have to be more specific." She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether I was being funny. "Between North Crest and Weaver," she said. I said, "I've seen what you're asking about. Have you stepped onto it?" "No." She took that in like a doctor nodding at a lab result. "If you do," she said, "don't let the doors shut." "Is that a joke?" She didn't laugh. "It's only advice." I asked her what she knew. She said she wasn't cleared to share details. She sounded tired and careful. She took down my number. She told me not to go looking. She said, "If the door's open, stay on the train." After she left, I sat with my pen hovering over a scrap of paper for a long time. I wrote down her words and stared at them until they stopped being made of letters. Marco came in late with his mop and his headphones around his neck. He looked older than he had the month before. He asked me if I still saw Mercy. I said yes. He asked if I'd heard what happened at the school near the old hospital site. I said no. He said a janitor went missing, just gone between shifts. He shrugged like he wanted to throw the thought away. Then he said, "They say every time somebody goes, Mercy gets brighter." I hit him with the rolled-up magazine from the desk. Not hard, just enough. He flinched, and then we both pretended it didn't happen. We're good at pretending. You want me to tell you about the legend beneath the legend? Okay, here it is, straight. No spooky voice, no italics. The story is that Mercy was built to serve the hospital, but the hospital had a rule: no dead carried above the ground. If you died there, you went out the tunnels to the Potter's Gate at the edge of the line. That way, patients and families would never see a stretcher go out into the street. They'd never know who lived and who didn't. Not for sure. It made the hospital feel cleaner. People liked that. According to the story, there was a month in the old days when the hospital lost a lot of people in a short time. A fever ran through the wards. It took the middle-aged and the elderly and left the children with red rims around their eyes. The staff worked until they couldn't see straight. The car that carried the dead had to make more runs than usual. The night foreman on the line was called Weber, or Weaver, or something like that. The names change in the telling. He had a bad leg from a construction fall. He took a crew down to fix something in the tunnel that kept tripping the power. He didn't come back. The story says the car carrying the dead never made it to the gate that night. The next day they bricked in a section of tunnel and told everyone it was a cost-saving measure. The hospital stopped using the car. They started rolling the dead upstairs like everyone else. That's the story. None of that is in the city records you can find. Maybe it's all lies. Here's what I know. Mercy is there. The tiles say Mercy. The map says Mercy. The people who come from there look like they've been somewhere for a long time, and they're hungry in a way that isn't about food. The doors sometimes open. The people who step off sometimes don't step back on. And the killings kept going. I won't list them. You can find them if you want. Maybe you won't sleep. Maybe you will. I don't have sleep to give you, so I won't try. One night I was too wired to take the train. I walked home. It took just under an hour and my feet hurt halfway through. I passed the high school with the glass gym. It was lit for a volleyball game or practice. Girls in shorts jumping and laughing while their coach shouted. I stood by the fence and watched for a minute. The light from the gym spilled onto the sidewalk and made the night look like it had teeth. I kept going. Near my building, a man stepped out from a recessed doorway and matched my pace. He was my height and build. He wore a denim jacket and his hair was almost the same cut as mine, a little grown out, like a cheap haircut in need of a better one. "Hey," he said like he knew me. I said, "Hey, you work at the Harlan Tower, right? Night desk?" I didn't answer. He smiled like we were boys and he'd remembered a joke. "I see you on the train sometimes," he said. "I see you watching the glass." "Okay," I said. "That's weird." "It's all weird," he said. "You seen Mercy?" I stopped walking. He stopped too. Something in his eyes flickered, not like light, more like somebody moving behind a curtain. "What do you want?" I asked. He pointed at my chest. "You're going to do something about it, right?" "About what?" "About the door." He laughed and kept walking. I felt my fingers curl like they were looking for something to hold. I didn't follow him. I listened to his shoes scuff the sidewalk. I watched him cross at the corner without waiting for the light. He got lost between two cars, and I couldn't pick him out again. The next morning, the train stopped at Mercy, and the doors opened. No announcements, no warnings. It felt like a quiet invitation. The platform looked the same as always. Green tiles, black bench, empty case. No one stood there. The air smelled like chalk. The woman who told me not to let the doors shut wasn't there to repeat herself. Marco wasn't there to stare at me and crack a joke and make it easier to stay on the train. It was just me and an old man in a brown suit who might have been asleep, and a kid in a hoodie who stared at the floor like he was reading something written there in invisible ink. I stepped out. I expected a jolt, like I'd been lying to myself and the platform would be a trick when I touched it. It wasn't. It was steady under my feet. The tiles were slippery, not from water, but from whatever lives in the air underground, and never dries. A small square of tile near the bench was missing, and the hole looked newer than the tiles around it, like someone had pried it up and didn't know how to put it back. The train doors stayed open. The people inside went quiet. I felt 1,000 eyes on me. I felt like a fish jumping at the surface while the boaters point and shout. I walked to the bench. The paint on the back had flaked off in long strips, and someone had scratched letters into the wood beneath. It wasn't a word I knew. It wasn't in English. It could have been someone's initials or a code or just board handwork. The glass case held nothing. The sign above the stairs said mercy in letters that still had their shine under the dirt. I took a step toward the stairs. They led down into blackness. There were no lights. The kind of black that eats the edges of whatever you hold into it. I held my phone out with the flashlight on. The light made a cone that didn't go as far as I wanted. The stairs were normal stairs. The second one down had a chip out of the edge. I wanted to say the word, hello, but my mouth didn't want to call anything up. I listened. There was no sound except the train and the small sounds people make when they are trying not to make any sound at all. I turned. The train doors slid shut. The motion wasn't loud. I didn't hear a slam. I don't know how they moved without that chime they always do, but they did. One smooth line coming together, and then they were closed. The train moved. It moved like a boat leaving a dock while you're on the shore and you aren't ready to swim. I ran and put my hands on the glass. I could see the old man in the brown suit, awake now, his mouth open like a round hole. I could see the kid in the hoodie staring right at me for the first time. I could see my reflection look back at me with that same stupid open mouth. Then the train went into the dark, and there was only me and Mercy and the sound of the air. I didn't panic. That's not a brag. It was like the panic happened somewhere else. My body didn't get the message. I stood still and counted. I said the names of stations under my breath like a litany. I said Weaver. I said Northcrest. I said Mercy. I waited to wake up and I didn't. I checked my phone. No service, of course. My flashlight ticked down 1% just from the screen being on. I turned it off. I told myself I'd use it only if I had to. There was a rumble in the distance. It could have been another train. It could have been the building above us clearing its throat. I didn't like that thought. I turned my back to the stairs. I looked down the platform. At the far end was a maintenance door, the kind with a steel frame and a push bar. It had a padlock hanging loose from a hasp that was bent open. Someone had cut it or pried it. It looked recent. The metal was bright. I walked to the door. The round windows were black. When I put my hand to the glass, it felt cold enough to bite. I pushed the bar. The door swung inward without a sound. The smell that came out was stale and fine and dry, like the breath inside a jar that's been sealed for years. There was a corridor beyond with a low ceiling and pipes with little tags wired to them. The tags had numbers that meant nothing to me. The corridor ran parallel to the platform for a while, and then took a turn. On the wall at the first turn, someone had drawn a circle in chalk. The chalk was smudged, but the circle was still there. I don't know why I went in. I could say I wanted to find a way back to the regular tunnel. I could say I wanted to see if there was a service staircase up to the street. The truth is, I didn't want to sit on that bench and wait for a train that might not open its doors. My legs needed to move. I needed to be the thing moving, not the thing left behind. The corridor went on longer than I wanted. There were doors set into the walls with stenciled words: electrical, water, switchgear. Some were locked. Some had the locks cut. In one, there was a folding chair and 3 empty water bottles and a stack of crumpled wrappers. A camp for 2-hour breaks. The chair had a dent in the seat where someone's weight had lived for a while. At the second turn, someone had written a word on the wall in big block letters. It said return. The paint was old and brown, and it looked like it had been applied with a rag. It could have said something else once, and this was what was left. Under it, there was a mark in the shape of a hook. I thought about that minimalist advice. If you get lost underground, mark your path. I don't know where I learned that. Probably a movie. I took the map from my pocket and tore off one clean edge. I used a key to scratch a line in the wall at knee height, a clumsy arrow pointing the way I came. It made me feel like a scout. It made me feel like the kind of person I wasn't. The corridor tilted down. That was the first thing that scared me. Not a jump scare, not a shadow. Just the realization that I was going deeper, and there would be more of that ahead of me, and getting back might be a fight with gravity. I told myself I'd go 50 more steps, and then turn around. At the bottom of the tilt, there was another door. This one was wood and swelled up with damp. It had that old hospital look, like someone tried to make it cheerful by painting it a color that only exists in wards and cafeterias. It had a metal plaque screwed on crooked. The plaque said, "Staff." Someone had broken the top screw, and the plaque angled down like a lazy eyelid. I pushed the door. It groaned like doors in stories do, and I laughed in a dry, ugly way because I couldn't believe we were doing that now. It stuck, and then gave. The room beyond was larger than I expected. My phone light showed me a floor lined with square tiles, black and white check, not fancy, just busy on the eyes. It showed me a counter that ran the length of one wall, with stools bolted to the floor, the kind that spin slowly when you push them. It showed me a chalkboard with a menu written in ghost handwriting that might have said soup, and might have said something else. It showed me a door at the far end with a little swinging window like in a diner. Kitchen, my brain said. Staff cafeteria. I had found it. Mercy's staff level. The room had a drawn-in feel, like all the air had been pulled out once and then allowed to creep back in. Dust lay in the corners like old hair. On the counter was a cup with a handle broken off and a ring of scum around the inside that had hardened into lace. I walked behind the counter. The kitchen door swung when I pushed it, and something brushed my shoulder, and I flinched hard enough to knock into a stool. It was just a chain hanging from the ceiling with a hook on the end for a pot that was long gone. The chain clicked as it swung. I let my breath out slow so I didn't make a sound like a balloon. The kitchen was a room full of silhouettes, stove against the wall, pans with black bottoms hanging like moons, a clock with no hands. Someone had gone through here before me and left footprints in the dust that looked like water stains. I followed them to a short hall that went to a locker room. The lockers had rusted mouths. One was bent open. and inside was a sweater with a name tag still pinned to it. The tag said Lila in red letters. I held the sweater and it came apart at the hem like a paper towel. I don't know how long I spent down there. Time loses its shape when there's no window, and no noise except your breath, and the tap of your shoe on concrete, and the careful mistakes you make touching things that haven't been touched in too long. I think it was an hour, maybe more. My phone dropped to 70%, then 65. I started thinking about that door, and about the word return. I went back. At the staff door, I made a mark with my key like before. I felt better. I passed the hook mark. I passed the water bottles and the chair. I passed the first chalk circle. I turned once, and then I turned again, and there was a stretch of corridor I didn't remember. A new angle. A new row of numbered tags on pipes, with numbers that meant nothing. I couldn't smell mercy anymore. That sharp chalk smell. The air here smelled like wet books. I tried to be calm. I put my hand flat on the wall and I walked. I counted 50 steps. I put another scratch mark. I walked 50 more. I turned. I ran my hand across a patch where the concrete was smooth instead of rough. It felt like a hand had been there for a long time, pressing, wishing for the wall to open. After a while, I saw light. It was too warm to be mercy. I wanted to want it, but I didn't trust it. I moved slower. I held my key like a thing that could help. The light was a rectangle ahead, like a room with fluorescent panels and a door open. As I got closer, I heard a sound. Not a train, not water. It was voices. It was a man and a woman talking low in that way people talk when they've said everything, and they're still talking because the silence feels worse. I stopped outside the doorway and looked in. It was a maintenance room and it was clean. Not clean like hospital clean, but clean like somebody worked there and cared where the broom stood. There were 2 people sitting on milk crates at a folding table. They wore transit uniforms. Their jackets were folded on the table, and their shirt sleeves were rolled up. Between them was a laptop with a spreadsheet open, and 2 paper cups with a logo I didn't recognize. The man was tracing a line on a printout with a pencil. The woman had a small radio clipped to her belt, and a tattoo on her forearm of a leaf. I stepped in. They both turned their heads at once. They didn't stand. They didn't look surprised. The woman moved her hand toward the radio, and then away like she changed her mind. "Hey," I said. "Hey," the man said. "I got off at Mercy," I said. The woman nodded. "You shouldn't have." "I know. Are you alone?" "Yes." She looked at the man. He sighed. He said, "You see anyone?" "Down there." "Anywhere?" "I saw you. Before us." I shook my head. The woman stood and stretched like she'd been sitting too long. She had the body of someone who spent a lot of time carrying things. She said, "You need to get back. Your train won't stop again for you. It's not a taxi." "How do I?" She pointed past me to a metal door I hadn't noticed. It had a sign that said service. "Up those stairs," she said. 3 landings. Left at the landing with the yellow stripe. If you hit a red door, you went too far. I didn't move. She sighed again, this time at me. "You don't need a lecture, do you?" "I honestly might." "Okay." She looked me in the eye like she wanted to make sure I was fully present. "Things under the city don't like being seen. They're shy until they aren't. People get curious and then people get hungry. Not for food, for something else. You don't need to understand it. Just don't give it your time. Time is an offering. You stare at something long enough and you feed it. The man made a face like he wanted to say she was being dramatic, but he didn't have a better version. He picked up his pencil again. Also, there's a risk you get hit by a train in a place you're not supposed to be. That's the practical version. I'm sorry, I said. You're not, the woman said, but not in a mean voice. You will be if you keep going. What about the murders? I said. Is this about that? She moved her hand toward the radio again. She looked tired in a way that made me want to go home and never think again. We don't comment on open investigations, she said, and then softer. Go home. I went to the door. My hand was on the knob when I turned back. Do you know a station agent who came by my building? Black coat, short hair. Told me not to let the doors shut. The man looked up. The woman's mouth flattened. The man said, If you see her again, tell her she needs to check in. Is she? Go home, the woman said again, and her voice had lost the softness. The stairs took me up into a heat that smelled like wet iron. I came out in a locked cage near the end of a platform I didn't recognize. But when I walked all the way down the platform and read the sign, it said North Crest. I let out a sound I won't describe, and the station agent at the booth looked over like he was spotting a shoplifter. I kept my head down, and I walked until my lungs settled into a rhythm they liked. I didn't tell Marco about any of that. I didn't tell anyone. I destroyed the map in the copier room. I tore it into pieces I could hide in my palm and flushed those palmfuls one at a time like I was disposing of a crime. I threw away my little notebook. I went home and slept hard and woke up in the dark with the taste of tile dust in my mouth. 2 days later, Marco didn't show up. He was scheduled to mop from midnight to 4. He always came at 11:55 with his headphones around his neck and a new song queued up. He was the only person who said good morning to the building like it was a person at that hour. The clock ran past midnight, and I didn't hear his shoes squeak. I called his phone. It rang once and went to voicemail. I called again. Same. I called the number of the cleaning company, and it sent me to a list of options that didn't include the one I needed. I wrote his name down and underlined it, like underlining meant anything. At 3, I went outside and stood where I could see down the street. The rain that started at 1 had turned the asphalt slick. I looked for him the way you look for a familiar shape in a crowd. The hairstyle, the walk, the way he carried his shoulders like he was about to put a joke somewhere. I saw none of it. At 4, I got a message from a number I didn't know. We need to talk. It didn't say who. I wrote back, Who is this? No answer. At 6, when I clocked out, I put my collar up and went to the ring line out of habit. I should have gone home. I should have called somebody who counts in situations like this. Instead, I went down the stairs and held onto the railing too tight and waited for the train like I was waiting on a decision. On the platform was the man with the paperback. He looked different, thinner. I don't know if that's possible in a few days, but that's what it looked like. He stood like someone who remembered being comfortable and couldn't find the position again. When the train came, he didn't get on. He moved back 3 steps and leaned against a pillar and watched it go. I wanted to ask him where he went. I didn't. I got on and took the first seat from the door like a man who means to stay put. The train slowed before Weaver. The lights did their dip. The doors opened at mercy. 2 figures waited on the platform. One was a woman with hair cut blunt along her jaw. She wore a black coat. The other was Marco. He didn't look surprised to see me. He lifted his hand and waved, casual, the way he did when he saw me across the lobby. The woman put her hand on his arm and leaned in like she was saying something I couldn't hear. I stood up. Everyone else in the car kept their eyes where they were, which is to say, not on me. I stood there with my knees like springs that had lost their snap. The woman looked through me. That's the only way I can say it. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking through the glass and the metal and the light and air, and she was checking something off in her head. Then she nodded, and Marco took a step toward the door. I didn't do anything heroic. There was no leap, no wrenching open of doors that aren't made to be opened by people like me. I put my hand on the edge like everyone else does when they think about holding something. The door didn't care. Marco stopped just outside. He said, "It's fine, the way you say it when it isn't." His face was open and all the jokes fell out of it. The woman tilted her head and watched the space above my shoulder like she could see something there I couldn't. Behind them, at the far end of the platform, the maintenance door stood open. The lock hung. The corridor beyond was a mouth. I heard the woman's voice, but her mouth didn't move. That's not right. It moved a little. It moved like the way you talk to a baby when you're trying not to wake someone in the next room. She said, "Don't let the doors shut." The doors shut. I didn't see who moved first. I only know that the train went on, and the platform slid away, and the breath above my shoulder burned in a small spot like a penny heated on a stove. I sank into the seat as the car put on speed and everyone stared at the floor like it was reading to them. I missed Weaver. I missed the next stop after Weaver. I got off 2 stations later and waited for a train going back. When I got back to the gap where Mercy lives, there was only concrete. The train didn't slow. That day, I didn't sleep. I sat on my mattress with my back against the wall and my knees up, the way you sit when you're on the floor and the party is too loud. The apartments around me did their normal morning things. The shower above me that never shuts off all the way. The baby down the hall whose cry has a question in it. The neighbor who slams cupboards like they're teaching them a lesson. I held my phone and scrolled through the last text Marco sent me. Memes. A video of a guy cleaning a rug in a way that's too satisfying. A song. He had written, "This one slaps," and I had replied with a thumbs up. The space between those messages is the shape of a door. The next night I went to the building early. I asked the doorman who worked the shift before me if anyone had heard from the cleaning company. He said no. He said a woman called and asked if we'd seen anyone unusual around the service entrance. He gave me a look. He has a face like a cliff, and when he looks at you, you feel like you're walking along a narrow path with too much wind. I asked him what the woman sounded like. He said, like she was trying to smile with her voice, and the smile wasn't for us. Did she leave a name? No. She said she was following up. From City Transit? He shrugged. She said she was from where they count things. I don't know what that means. It feels like a riddle. But if it is, I don't know the answer. That night at 2 a.m, the fire alarm tripped. The tenants did their sleepy elevator dance, and the stairwell breathed out a hot wave of bodies and perfume and the smell of hot printer plastic from the offices. The floor warden on 18 showed up in pajama pants and a blazer, like he couldn't decide who he was. The alarm stopped after 5 minutes. The fire crew came and walked through the building and told us to go back to bed. The panel by my desk flashed a code I didn't know. The fire captain wouldn't tell me what zone it was. He said, "We're good here," and slapped the metal cabinet like a horse. The next morning on the train, the man with the paperback got on and sat across from me. He didn't open his book. He looked at his hands. He said, "There's a woman at Mercy." "I know," I said. "She asked me a question." "What was it?" He looked up. His eyes were the color of damp stone. "She asked me if I remembered my mother's kitchen." I didn't breathe. He went on, his words in the air like someone laying out tools one by one. "She asked me if I remembered the tilt of the floor near the sink where the linoleum peeled up. She asked me if I remembered the smell the toaster made after a long winter. She asked me if I remembered the drawer where we kept the twist ties and the scissors that were never sharp. I said yes. She said, "That's yours. You can keep it. You don't have to bring it here." He swallowed. His throat worked like someone trying to form a new word. I told her I didn't want to bring anything. She smiled. She said, "You already did. What did you bring?" He didn't answer. He got off at Weaver without looking back. I stood without meaning to, the way people stand when they realize it's their stop and they've been thinking too hard. On the platform, I watched him go. He didn't turn left. He went right. I followed. He walked to the old Payless that turned into a vape shop that turned into a space with a for lease sign that never changes. He stopped and looked into the black window like it might show him an answer. He turned and saw me and said, "It's just a place." And then he kept walking. When I got home that night, there was a paper under my door. No envelope, no letterhead. Just one sheet printed with a map of the ring line like the one I had in my locker, but older, with the lines drawn by hand in ink that had bled. The Mercy stop was marked with a circle and a little heartbeat line drawn next to it. Underneath the map, a sentence, "We're almost done." No signature, no number. The letters were neat and plain. My name was not on it. It didn't need to be. I went to work and tried to see if anyone looked at me like they knew I had gotten a delivery. I realized that thinking like that is how you fall into the gap between stories and days. I stood and held the counter and waited for something to put my weight on. A woman came in with a package and wrote her name in the book. I didn't look at it. I can't tell you what it was. Maybe that matters. Maybe it doesn't. At 3, I got a call from a number I didn't know. I answered. The voice was the woman from City Transit. I recognized the careful shape of it, the way she kept the edges clean. She said, "He's with us." "Who?" "Your friend. The one with the mop." The air in my throat felt like fabric. "Is he okay?" "He's with us," she said again. "We're going to close the door. You don't need to do anything." "Close it how?" "By counting," she said. "By measuring the train length and aligning the circuit. By firming up the parts that got soft." "You're making this up," I said. "If I am, that's a relief, isn't it? She breathed out through her nose. We need you to stop watching. I don't know how. Then get off the loop. Take the bus, ride a bike, walk. You told me not to let the doors shut. I told you not to be the person who holds them open either, she said. There's a middle. Find it. What about the killings? She paused. When she spoke, her voice went flat like a hallway. That's not what this call is about. Is it connected? Don't look, she said, and the line clicked. The phone showed me a number with no name. I tried to call back. A recording told me the number was not in service. I didn't ride the train for 3 days. I walked. My feet blistered. I started wearing a pair of sneakers I bought for a New Year's resolution that didn't last. I avoided the streets where the ring line ran under the road. I avoided the places where the grate in the sidewalk pushes out breath. I tried not to look at missing posters tacked to telephone poles. I tried not to read the articles that still got written even when they said the police were following leads. I tried to live in the top half of the city where the sun hits. On the 4th day, I ran into the man in the denim jacket who had matched my pace weeks ago. He was sitting on the low wall outside the bodega with a coffee he didn't drink and a newspaper he didn't read. He looked up at me like he'd been waiting. You're going to have to go back, he said. No, I'm not. You can try that, he said, but it won't be done with you. I told him not to talk in riddles. He grinned like we were sharing a bit. Who's talking in riddles? He said. I'm telling you straight. Some doors open and some doors close and some doors just sit there and you're the one who moves. You move, it moves. You stop, it waits. What are you? He raised his cup. A neighbor. He stood. He was my height and build. He could have been my brother or my reflection after a week of different choices. He put the cup on the ground and it left a ring like a stamp. When you go back, he said, don't bring anything you want to keep. I'm not going back. He walked away. He crossed at the light without waiting. He slid between 2 cars and was gone. I stood there long enough for the bodega owner to come out and ask if I was buying something or just making his storefront look sad. That night I dreamed I was standing at the mercy of a word that didn't exist in English. It was a word like dust on your tongue. When I woke up, I had my shoes on. The map was on my kitchen table even though I had torn it up. I don't know how to explain that. Maybe I kept a copy and forgot. I don't think so. The heartbeat line next to Mercy had grown longer. The line ran off the edge of the page. In the morning, I went back to the ring line like a man going to a dentist he can't afford not to see. I stood in the middle of the car and breathed slow and tried to think of nothing. That's hard. Thinking of nothing is like holding water in your hands. The train slowed. The lights dipped. The doors opened at Mercy. On the platform stood 3 people. One was the woman in the black coat. One was Marco. The third was the station rat from the internet, or someone who matched the handle. A person in a brown jacket with a camera bag on their hip and a too careful posture. The way people stand when they've been noticing things for too long. I didn't know their face, but I knew their shape. My stomach turned over like a lazy dog. The woman lifted her hand the way conductors do. The script of it made me feel sick. She looked older than the last time I saw her, like somebody had traced lines on her face with a pencil and then smudged them. Marco's mouth formed my name. His voice didn't carry. It looked like he was asking me to come. Behind them, at the far end of the platform, someone else stood near the maintenance door. Not in it, near it. I had the impression of a coat and a hat, and the way some people never look straight at you, even when they're talking to you. I thought of the janitor at the high school. I thought of the bus driver. I thought of the newsstand guy. There are moments when you feel the hinge in the day, where you know that if you do one thing, you will be one person, and if you do another, you will be someone else. It doesn't need a special time or a score playing behind it. It just needs you to notice it while it's happening. I stepped out. The air on the platform felt like a held breath. The tiles smelled like chalk and old sugar. The letters of mercy caught the train light and gave it back in a tired way. Marco was close enough to touch. I didn't. He smiled and the smile shook. "They're closing it," he said. "Who's they?" He looked at the woman. She didn't step in. She watched us like we were coming up from a dive, and she was making sure we didn't come up too fast. "They need someone to hold the door," Marco said. "No," I said. "It's okay," he said. "It's me. It should be me." "Why?" He shrugged a little. "Because I came here. Because I got off when I shouldn't. Because I waved at you like this was easy." He lifted his hand and waggled his fingers. It was a joke and a goodbye. "I'll come back," he said, "when it's done." They're just counting. It's like when you measure a room twice before you cut the wood. It's just numbers. He didn't believe that. I don't know if he ever believed that. He said it for me. "Help me," I said to the woman. She met my eyes. "Don't let the doors shut." I looked at the train. It was still open. People in the car stared at the floor, at their phones, at the gap. One woman looked right at me and shook her head, slow and small, like she was saying no to a child reaching for a hot pan. At the end of the platform, the person by the maintenance door shifted like a shadow, cutting a new angle. I felt that same hot coin of breath near my shoulder. I don't know if it was real. My mind makes orderly pictures when it should be making chaos. Marco put a hand on my arm. His palm was cold. "It's okay," he said again. And that time he meant what those words mean when they don't mean anything at all. The woman stepped between us and the corridor. Her hands were empty, and that made it worse somehow. She said, "When we close it, there will be pressure. That's how it works. It's not a door like at your apartment. It's a door like a lung. It pushes and pulls. It wants the balance it remembers." I didn't want her lesson. I wanted a key, a lock, a chain. I wanted human things. "What about the murders?" I said again. "What about the people who—" She shook her head. "Different door," she said, and her voice had gone to that flat hallway place again. "Don't mix them. If you mix them, you feed both. How do you know which is which?" "You don't," she said, and smiled a small, true smile, like we were sharing a secret she hated. "But you can choose which one you stand in front of." She pointed at the train with her chin. "Go." Marco nodded. His face was steady now in a way that made me want to break something tender. He said, "Tell my cousin I stole his hoodie in 10th grade and I'm sorry I never said it." Tell him he was always better than me at keeping time. I don't know your cousin. You'll find him, he said. You're good at finding what you're not supposed to find. The doors chimed. Not the mercy doors, the train doors. The polite sound of a city machine doing what it's meant to do. People lifted their heads. Their eyes found the gap and then me. And then their eyes went somewhere else, because that's safer. I stepped back toward the car. I hated that step. I hated the air I had to breathe to take it. I put my hand out like I might still get to be useful, like I might make a difference. The woman in the black coat watched me and kept her hands at her sides. She said, "If you want to help, don't look." I got on the train. I turned. Marco stood with his hands in his pockets like when he was about to start the mop, like he was waiting on the song to kick in. He said, "It slaps," and laughed once, and then the doors shut. The train moved. I watched Mercy slide away. The tiles and the bench in the empty case, the maintenance door, the shape near the door, the letters of Mercy like a stare. Then the concrete took their place, and the tunnel went on, and the tunnel went on, and the tunnel went on. At Weaver, I got off and stood until the platform cleared. I stood until the station agent told me I had to go. I told him a man had gotten off between stations. He sighed like he had been told his whole life to quit doing something he couldn't stop. He said, "Don't get off between stations," and looked at the next person in line. I went home. I slept. I woke to a dream where I was counting, not 1, 2, 3, 4 in a song or the way you count money. I was counting beats inside a wall. Each one had a shape like a small square missing from a tile. Each one had a smell like chalk. The count got faster, then slower, then fast again. It made no sense. It made the kind of sense you only feel in your bones where the marrow reads old news. The next day, the man with the paperback wasn't on the platform. The woman at the sandwich place wasn't at the counter. The bus driver who used to mouth the words to the radio where the ads go wasn't at the wheel. I know this sounds like I'm making a net out of holes. That's how it felt. At work, the doorman with the cliff face asked me if I was okay. I said I was tired. He nodded and didn't offer anything else. We live in a city of polite distance. It keeps the peace until it doesn't. At 3, the building's power hiccuped. The lights went sick for a second. The computer screens went black and then returned with that wrong brightness feeling, like a new room you haven't adjusted to. I watched the panel behind the desk and waited for a red light that didn't come. At 3:15, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. It was the woman. "It's starting," she said. "What is?" "The close." "What do you need me to do?" She breathed, big, like she had been holding it forever. "Don't look. I'm on shift. Look at the lobby. Look at the clock. Look at the old magazines people leave and never take. Look at your hands. What about Marco?" She paused. The pause was a room with a chair, and I sat in it, and no one else came in. Then she said, "They're counting." "How long?" She didn't answer. The line started to crackle like the sound of an old TV when you hit the side of it. She said, "Whatever you hear, it's not for you." And then the phone went dead. I set the phone down. I looked at the clock, like she said. I looked at the lobby. I looked at my hands. They were my hands. The lobby was the lobby. The clock went on. At 4, a woman came in with a stack of boxes, and asked me to sign for them, even though I'm not supposed to. I did. I don't know why. She smiled with her mouth only. People do that when their eyes are somewhere else. At 5, the air in the lobby changed. It went thicker for a second, like when you walk into a store where the heat's turned too high. The doors to the street moved in their frames like someone pushed on them from outside. I stood up. The doorman looked up. We both stood there with our hands half out like crossing guards. The heat softened. The doors settled. The doorman blinked. "Earthquake," he said. "We don't get them. Not the real ones." I shook my head. He nodded like I had made a statement and he was checking it off. At 6, I got on the train home because walking felt like I'd be trying to outrun my shadow, and I didn't have that in me. The car was half full. People were in their morning silence. The train moved. It slowed. It did not stop. Between Northcrest and Weaver, where my heart lives now, I saw the tiles of Mercy out the window. The bench, the case, the door. I saw for a half second or a whole hour that the word Mercy had been scrubbed. The letters were clean. They shone like teeth. It made my chest hurt. A figure stood on the platform, alone. It was a woman with a blunt haircut. She held her hands in front of her like she was warming them over a fire you couldn't see. She didn't look at the train. She looked at the door. If she said anything, I couldn't hear it. Then concrete. Then dark. Then the clean lit station with its posters and its gum stains. When I got off, my phone buzzed. A message from a number with no name. "We're halfway," it said. No signature. No instructions. I went home and took off my shoes and thought about burning them like pilgrim boots. I stood at my sink and drank water like it was medicine. I looked at my hands like they were new. I lay down and didn't sleep for a long time. My dreams were full of rooms with doors that were almost open. I kept waking and telling myself to pick one and go through it. Every time I picked the one that stayed shut. After the message that said, "We're halfway," the city went strange in ways you could measure and in ways you couldn't. Elevators paused with their doors half open and then shut without anyone touching the buttons. On some corners, the walk signals took longer than they should, long enough that people started to cross on the red because they were tired of waiting, and the drivers didn't honk. They just watched. Down in the stations, you could hear the trains before you saw them, and sometimes you felt them without either. Just a shove of air through the tunnels that made everyone adjust their stance, and then pretend they hadn't. One morning, the walls along the ring line wore new water stains shaped like long handprints that ran down to the floor. The news didn't mention any of that. The news talked about patrols and curfews that weren't called curfews, and the way citizens could help by reporting suspicious behavior. I kept my eyes on the floor, like the woman told me. I tried not to feed anything. It lasted days. Not a lot of them, but long ones. I could feel the counting beneath the city the way you feel a bass line through a wall you can't see through. It was there when I stood at my desk, and it was there when I lay on my bed. And when I pressed my ear to the pillow, the sound got clearer. Not a heartbeat, not a drum, not a clock. A counted thing. I don't know who was doing the counting or how. It may be that nothing under the city knows how to count except us. Maybe that's why it needs us. I tried not to ride. I failed. At the end of the week, I went back down because I couldn't stand walking past the grates and hearing the warm breath and not knowing how it was moving. The platform at Northcrest was full, but not crowded. That in-between number where everyone is a person and not a mass. The train pulled in, and I got on and stood in the middle. The car smelled like a dozen different detergents fighting with each other. A man at the far end sang a tiny song to himself, like the part of a prayer you only say for yourself. A teenage girl in a yellow jacket kept making and unmaking a tight fist, as if she was trying to remember how hands work. Between Northcrest and Weaver, the train slowed. I didn't look at the window. I looked at the floor, at the chewing gum moons, at my shoes. The doors stayed shut. The car took on speed again like nothing had happened, but everyone had squared their shoulders in the same way. So something had. At Weaver, I stayed on. The man with the paperback wasn't there. I started to think of him like a marker that told me what kind of day I was in. Without him, I felt unmarked. I got off 2 stations later and took a bus back toward the old hospital site. I hadn't been there since the volleyball night. The school looked the same. Glass gym, big wide stairs, the kind of landscaping that always looks new no matter how long it's been there. But the block around it felt off-kilter, like a picture hung slightly crooked. I bought a coffee from a cart that always parks near the bus stop and watched the sidewalk. 2 maintenance workers in transit jackets came up from a service hatch by the curb. One held a clipboard. One held a coil of yellow rope. They didn't look around the way people look around when they've just come up from somewhere private. They walked like they knew exactly which light they had to fix next. As they crossed the street, I saw Station Rat. I can't swear it was them, but the camera bag matched the blurry profile picture, and the way they held their shoulders matched the way I imagined it every time I thought about their posts. They stood with one foot on the low wall by the gym and pointed their lens down at the service hatch the workers had left. Zoom, click. Zoom, click. They didn't look up. I walked over and said their handle out loud like a name. They didn't startle. They glanced up and then down, a little nod that admitted who they were without making a scene of it. "You shouldn't post right now," I said. "I stopped," they said. Their voice was neither high nor low. It had the flatness of someone who stands behind a lens a lot. "I'm just watching. You should stop that too." "Why are you watching me?" they said, and I didn't have a good answer. I thought about telling them what the woman in the black coat had told me. Don't look. Don't feed it. But I sounded like a fool in my head, a man who believes he's seeing things other people can't see because he wants to feel important. "I knew someone who got off," I said. "He's holding the door while they close it." Station Rat's face didn't move. They didn't blink much. They executed a small shrug. "Someone always holds the door." "Who told you that?" "Old people. Maintenance guys with long memories. A woman who works nights who brought me a coffee and told me a story once." "Pick one." "That woman," I said. "Short hair, black coat." "Different woman," they said. "Long braids. Wore a scarf even when it was hot. She whisper yelled when she got excited." "She's still around?" "No." We stood there and watched the hatch like it would produce an answer. The rope coil was gone. The lid settled back into place with a soft clink. My coffee cooled to the temperature where it tastes like a mistake. I threw it away because I couldn't stand to hold something that had stopped being useful. "Don't go down," I said. Station Rat nodded like I had given them the password to a club they didn't want to join. "I know," they said. "I went last year." Not far. Far enough to know. What did you see? Unused rooms that looked like what every unused room looks like, they said. And one used room with a radio left on with the volume low. Somebody checks a thing there sometimes. That made me feel safer. And then it didn't. Why not? Because somebody was checking something. They slipped the lens cap back on. You can't unknow that there are things that need checking where nobody goes. I don't know if that was wisdom or if it was practice. Words they say when people like me ask questions to make themselves feel better. It worked like a hand on my shoulder anyway. I went to work. I did a poor job at pretending everything was regular. I made mistakes with packages. I called the wrong tenant for a wrong pizza. I signed my name twice on a line where only one signature should go. The doorman with the cliff face watched me like a lifeguard watching a swimmer who keeps drifting out past the buoy. On my break, I checked the message again. We're halfway. I wanted a second message. Nothing came. I opened my front-facing camera and looked at my own face like I might find a message written there. It was just me. More tired than last week. My eyes looked like they were trying to get away from each other. In the morning, I went back to the ring line. I didn't tell myself I wouldn't look. I didn't make any promises I couldn't keep. I just got on and stood. We slowed. The lights dipped. I looked. The doors stayed shut. On the Mercy platform, I saw 3 things I hadn't seen before. The first was chalk marks along the lip of the platform. Short, stacked lines like tally marks counting something that wasn't us. The second was a length of chain coiled near the maintenance door, fresh metal against black tile. The third was the woman in the black coat standing with her back to the tracks, hands out, palms forward, like she was feeling the air for a seam. We passed. The doors didn't open. The car took on speed. People breathed again the way people breathe when they didn't mean to stop. At the next stop, I got off and took the stairs 2 at a time until my breath hurt my ribs. I stood on the street and the air felt wrong, not bad, just like the wrong size. I went home and tried to sleep without dreams and dreamed anyway. The dream. A corridor and a word in brown paint that sometimes said return, and sometimes said turn, and sometimes said rune, and sometimes wasn't a word at all but the shape of one. A voice, not the woman's, not Marco's, not mine, counting in a low, steady tone. Not numbers, but measure words, the way musicians talk. Bars, beats, rests, hold, release, hold. I woke up with the urge to go underground so strong I swore out loud in an empty room just to put a human sound between me and whatever kept whispering. I made eggs. I threw them away. I put on my sneakers. I walked. I didn't head for the station. I headed for the service entrance behind a strip of storefronts 2 stops from Mercy. If you look hard in this city, you find the little doors, the ones nobody paints. The ones with stenciled words like deliveries only and authorized and no smoking. They're all part of the same digestive tract. If you know one, you know them all. The one behind the strip was open a crack. A thin line of light cut the shadow. I told myself a lie. I told myself I was just going to push it shut. I got close and listened. Muffled metal sounds. Not a train. Not a fan. Tools. I pushed the door. It moved without a complaint. Inside was a dim corridor with conduit along the ceiling and a smell like bleach that had lost a fight. A shape stepped out of a doorway 20 feet down, carrying a toolbox. He turned his head. It was the man in the denim jacket. Neighbor. He didn't look surprised to see me. He smiled like we were in on something together. He held the toolbox like it weighed nothing. "You," I said, because I didn't have anything better. "Me," he said. "What are you doing?" "Fixing what somebody thought they fixed," he said, and that answered nothing and everything. He set the toolbox down with a careful clunk and opened it. Inside were not the tools I expected, not wrenches and pliers and a flashlight, but small, neat things wrapped in cloth. He unrolled one, a slip of shaped metal notched like a key. Another, thin wire, shiny and clean. Another, a razor on a handle that wasn't a box cutter but might have been its grandfather. He looked up at me over the laid-out kit with the proud look of a craftsman. "When a door has been closed too long," he said, "it forgets its shape. You have to remind it. It wasn't Mercy there. I knew that. It was some other door. Somewhere above us was a shoe store, and a place that sells cheap cell plans, and a shop that used to be a hair salon and is now a church. He had been working this door. He had been counting. He had been reminding. "Is this you?" I said. "All of it." He made a seesaw hand. "Doors are never just one person, but I give them a push." "The people," I said. "The ones in the news. The ones not in the news." He looked at his kit like he was setting a board for a game. "Sometimes a door wants a wait. You use what you have." I moved without deciding to. I grabbed for the toolbox. He was faster. He stepped back like a dancer and I caught air. He didn't counter or hit me or pull a knife. He just put a finger to his lips like a teacher asking for quiet. I think that easy gesture is what made my stomach turn. "Don't," he said. "You think I don't know who you are? You think I don't know you stand in front of doors and call it helping? I'm doing the same thing. I'm just less precious about what a door costs." "You killed them." My voice came out wrong in the narrow hallway. It sounded like a stranger's voice that had borrowed my throat. "You cut them. You put your hands in their lives and took them away." He nodded as if I'd finally said something correct. "I did," he said, "and the city moved for it. It needed to. It's clogged. The old tunnels are choking. The dead get jammed behind the bricks and then they leak. I make the line clean." "You're not a plumber," I said, because my brain wanted to make this smaller, wanted to make it dumb enough to fight. He smiled with half his mouth. "No," he said, "I'm a neighbor. I live here. I want the block to work. You do too. Not like this." "Like what then?" "Like standing in a car, staring out a window until the doors do what you want. That's a kind of killing. You kill your time. You kill your attention. You feed your fear. Don't pretend you're soft. You're not." He picked up the razor on its handle. He didn't hold it out. He kept it by his thigh, pointed down, casual. "You think the woman in the coat is different from me," he said, and it wasn't a question. "She counts. I count. We're cousins. She wants one door shut. I want more doors open. That's a family argument." "What about Mercy?" I said, because saying the name felt like waking from a bad spell. "What about the people there?" He tilted his head toward the corridor behind him, where the light got small and then turned. "It's around every corner," he said. "You know that by now." I don't know what I would have done next if a noise hadn't come from the doorway he stepped out of. Not a big noise. The little sound of someone trying not to make one. A shoe whispering against tile. He didn't turn his head. I did. It was Station Rat. They stood in the half-shadow with their camera in their hands like a shield that won't stop a knife. Their mouth was open, not in fear, but in that way you open your mouth when you don't know how to breathe here. Their eyes flicked from me to Neighbor, to the kit laid out on the floor. Neighbor sighed almost kindly. "You see how it is," he said to me, like we were sharing a moment after a long day. "They'll always come and look. And the ones who look are the ones who can be used. It's not even their fault. They're just tuned." He moved faster than he had any right to. And if you want me to tell you I stopped him, I can't. He crossed the space between him and Station Rat in 3 quiet steps and reached with the hand that wasn't holding the razor and grabbed their wrist. It was gentle, like a man guiding someone through a door before it closes. I said his name. No name I knew, just a sound that meant stop, and threw myself into him. We went down hard. The razor clattered and flashed. Station Rat jerked back behind the door jamb and hit the wall with their shoulder. He didn't go for the razor. He went for my face with his hand, not a fist, an open hand. He pressed his palm over my mouth and nose like someone testing a mask for fit. His skin smelled like metal and soap. My breath burned hot against his hand, and then had nowhere to go. He said, muffled and bright, "Shh. It's not for you." It took only a second, but it felt longer. I twisted, bit the base of his thumb, got a gummy mouthful of skin and sweat. He yanked his hand back with a jolt that said surprise more than pain. I got my knee under me and drove it into his ribs without art. Air left him in a quick dog bark sound. He rolled and I rolled, and the razor slid under the toolbox. Station Rat did something smart. They kicked the toolbox. Tools flipped and skittered. The wire coiled like a little metal snake and then went still. Neighbor's hand went for the razor anyway. I grabbed his jacket and pulled. He lost the angle. His shoulder hit the door frame. He grinned in my face, almost proud. Someone shouted, a real human shout, from the service corridor, not us. Heavy steps coming fast. Neighbor looked past me and made a snap calculation and let the razor go. He rolled through the door behind him with a cat's smoothness, and when the 2 transit maintenance guys from the street rushed in, he was gone into the bend of the passage, and all that was left was the smell of him and the wrongness of the kit. "Hey," one of the workers said, taking in the scattered tools, the open door, my bloody mouth, Station Rat's camera clutched in both hands. The other pulled his radio up to his mouth so fast he almost hit himself in the chin. He said into it, "We've got an incident. Lower Corridor B, unsecured. Non-staff presence. Possible suspect heading to..." He stopped. He looked at us. He looked at the door like it might answer. "Heading to the underrun toward the service spur," he finished, and I watched him improvise a name for some place he didn't want to name. They hustled us out. They weren't unkind. They just wanted us out of the hole. On the street, the light fell different, thin and flat, like the city didn't have depth today. One of the workers took our names like a teacher with a clipboard. The other kept his radio tight to his ear, talking low, listening hard. He said the words, "black coat," and "copy," and "hold for instruction," and then he swallowed like he'd drunk something that didn't want to be swallowed. "Go home," the clipboard one told us. If somebody from the city wants your statement, they'll get you. Don't post about this. Station Rat lifted their camera. The worker shook his head. Don't, he said. Not today. We walked away together without meaning to. When we got to the corner, Station Rat said, "You got in the way." I didn't stop him. "You got in the way," they repeated, like that word mattered. "You think he's the only one?" "No," I said. "I think he's the one who thinks he's me." They nodded once. They looked smaller without the lens in front of their eye. "They told me not to look," they said. "I tell myself I'm looking for other people. Sometimes I am. Sometimes I'm just looking." We split. I went home and washed my mouth and watched the water run pink and then clear. I sat on the edge of the tub and shook like all the trembling I'd hidden finally found me. I told myself not to go back. I went back. Back to work. Back to the desk. Back to the lobby with its smell of stone and carpet cleaner and old coffee. The woman in the black coat called while I was counting pens because counting anything that wasn't a sound felt like a blessing. "We're almost there," she said. Same voice, careful, tired. "You saw something today?" "Yes." "You got hurt?" "No." "Anybody else?" "No." "Good," she said, and then after a small crackle, "Thank you." "For what?" I didn't catch him. "For not letting the door choose you," she said. "It likes people who look at it and forget why they're looking." "You didn't forget." I wanted to ask if Marco had forgotten. I wanted to ask if she had. I said, "Is Mercy closing?" "We've made the circle," she said. "We're tightening it. It has to be right, or it pops somewhere else. That's what he wants." "The neighbor, if that's what you call him," she said. "There are lots of neighbors today. He's one. He opens what we close and calls it balance. He's not wrong. He's just not on our side." "What's our side?" "The one that lets more people get home than don't," she said, and the words lodged under my ribs because they were the size of the hole I'd been carrying. "Listen to me. When it happens, it'll happen fast. Don't be underground. Don't be on a train. Don't be within the ring if you can help it." "What about you?" I said. "I'll be under," she said. "That's my job." "You told me not to look." "I'm not looking," she said. "I'm counting." The line clicked. I sat with the phone in my hand until the doorman said my name the way you say a child's name when the child has been staring too long at the curb while cars go by. I left early. I told the relief guy my stomach hurt, and he waved me off because he didn't care why as long as I was gone. I walked to the river because the river goes around things, and sometimes that makes me feel human. The water was high, not flood high, just impatient. I leaned on the rail and watched a log ride the current like a boat with no oars. I went home. I took a shower. I tried to nap. I woke to a silence that didn't fit the room. This building always has a sound. Far-off pipes, a neighbor with a laugh like a door hinge, somewhere a TV. During the day, a street shout that bounces off the brick and loses its words. Now there was none of that. The silence was so clean it made me think of snow. My skin went tight. I put my shoes on. I went outside. The street had people in it, but they weren't making noise. They were walking, not slow, not fast, with their faces set like they'd made a promise not to scream. Across the street, a man carrying a long box stopped and set it down and kept his hands on it like he'd forget it if he took them away. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and we both knew without saying that whatever was happening had started. I made a bad choice. I went down. I don't have an excuse. I'm not brave. I'm not useful. I just couldn't stand being above ground when the thing underneath me moved. I walked fast to the nearest ring line entrance and took the steps. On the landing, a woman stood with a suitcase and stared up at the ceiling tiles like she could see the weather through them. I passed her and went down into the heat and the air that holds its own breath. The platform was busy, not packed. A weird busy, like everyone whose body knew the way down had gone down, and everyone whose body didn't had stayed up. A transit cop stood by the stairs and talked into his shoulder and looked at nothing in particular. The sign blinked the way it does when there's a delay. Not helpful, just different. I stood where I always stand. The tile under my shoes felt warmer than usual, like the heat came from below, not above. I closed my eyes because it felt worse to look. I opened them because it felt worse to close them. I was a problem that couldn't be solved. A man's radio crackled and said a word I didn't catch, and then said, clear as day, "On your mark." He said, "Copy." He took 2 steps toward the edge, and then stopped because there was nowhere to go. People shifted. A child began to cry and then stopped, cut off like a breath under a hand. I felt it then. The pressure. Not a wind, not a shove. A change. The air flexed like a muscle contracting. The lights along the platform flickered, not on and off, but from their usual color to a color I don't know the name of. Paler, patient, like the room had been moved sideways. Somewhere close, metal groaned. It's a sound I've heard before. The sound of something finding its old shape again and not liking it. A train screamed in the tunnel and stopped short. Not at the platform. In the dark before it. People screamed with it. Not many. It's strange how quiet crowds can be when they know they are supposed to be. I took a step back from the edge because I didn't trust myself not to lean forward, and wouldn't that be the dumbest way to go out? The sign blinked. The platform took a breath. The sound came, counting. Not numbers, measure words. The ones from my dreams. Hold, hold, rest, release, hold. The hair on my arms lifted like it wanted to count too. From the far wall, from the seam near the ad panel with the insurance company's smiling faces, came a thin line of dust that ran down like a tear. A crack widened and then settled. A woman reached out to touch it, and then didn't. The transit cop said, "Don't," even though he was too far away to matter. The crack didn't open more. It didn't close. It just sat there like a mouth deciding whether to speak. The train in the tunnel hissed. The platform's lights flicked again. And then the air shifted in a way that told me if I had a choice to make, I had to make it now. I got on my knees. I don't know why. Maybe because standing felt like a lie, like I was pretending to be ready to move. On my knees, the tile was a temperature I could stand. I pressed my hand flat to it. The counting went through my palm and up my arm. It felt like being near a bass amp. It felt like being near a big animal. I said, in my head, not out loud, because out loud would have made it real. Close. I don't know who I said it to. Not to the woman in the coat. She wasn't there. Not to myself, because I didn't have that pull. I said it to the door like a person begging a person. Close. Close. close, please." The air pushed back, hard. I fell forward and my forehead bumped the tile, and I thought, I am praying to the floor. The crack by the ad panel spit dust. The child cried again, and this time didn't stop. The train in the tunnel slammed its brakes, and the scream went higher like a pain you can't hide anymore. The cop shouted. The radio shouted back. I stayed on my knees because standing up would have been theater, and I had no room for theater. Then it passed. That's all I can tell you. It didn't finish like a song. It didn't end. It just passed the way a wave passes through your body when you stand in the ocean, and for a second the water is up to your throat, and then it's back at your ribs and you're breathing again. The lights held steady. The sign stopped blinking. The crack by the ad panel didn't close, but it didn't widen. The train in the tunnel crept forward and sighed itself into the station. Doors closed, interior dark. People dared to talk again. Little sentences, not about what had happened, about where they needed to be, about coffee, about a show they were watching. Nobody said mercy. Most of them didn't know the word. I stood. My knees hurt. I wiped dust off my forehead with my sleeve, and now my sleeve had a gray mark on it that made me feel like a man who'd done a job and didn't deserve to. When I got on the train that came after the dark one, it moved without ceremony. Between Northcrest and Weaver, I looked. I always will. There was a platform. There will always be a platform if there's a tunnel big enough for one. The tiles were there. The bench was there. The case was there. The word wasn't there. Where mercy had been, the tiles were scrubbed to the bone, and the letters were gone, and your eye slipped over the place without catching anything. The maintenance door was shut with a new lock, bright as a coin fresh from a roll. No one stood on the platform. Not the woman. Not Marco. Not my neighbor. I got off at Weaver and waited on the station bench until my legs remembered they were good for walking. Upstairs, the city felt like a room that's been cleaned after a party. You can tell something happened in it, but not what. I didn't hear from the woman in the coat that day, or the next. On the third day, a text. "Do you have a minute?" No name, just the question. I wrote back yes. She called. "It held," she said. "No hello, no middle. We're going to weld the welds and paint the paint and write the report that says what we did. It will use words like inspection and hazard and integrity. It won't say what you want it to say. Don't ask me to write the other report. I can't. There's nowhere to send it." "Marco," I said. Silence. Then, the count finished. There was a counterweight. I can feel you trying to make me say words you can live with. I don't have them. "Is he dead?" I said. Because if we were going to talk plain, I needed the plainest word. "I don't know what that word means down there," she said, and for the first time her voice broke. "We don't have a box for it. He isn't where we are. He isn't where he was. He isn't lost. I don't know what else to say." "Will there be a list," I asked, "of the people who helped?" "There won't be a list," she said. "There will be files with no names that live in a folder that says miscellaneous. And in 20 years, a man who never rode the ring line will delete them to make room on a server for something else." "Then tell me something I can hold," I said. "Hold this," she said. "He made it easier. We would have done it without him, but it would have cost more. When the pressure hit, something would have given in the wrong place, and instead it gave in the right one. He stood where the weight needed to be. He knew that. He told me not to cry about it, and I told him I don't. And then I did. I sat and let the words be what they were. I didn't try to rub them until they fit. "What about the other door?" I said. "The one my neighbor keeps opening." "We'll close it," she said, "or it will eat what it will, and then stop when it's full. That's how these things go. We're better at the tunnels than we are at the stairs. Stairs are everyone's business." "The killings," I said. "We don't work those," she said. "But I'll tell you this, because I know you won't post it. The marks above the door frames, the ones shaped like letters, they're not letters. They're hooks. He hangs a little of himself there. That's how he finds his way back. If you see one, paint it. Scrub it. Don't take a picture of it. Pictures are doors too. You sound tired." "I'm in a chair I don't remember sitting down in," she said, and gave a small laugh that had no happiness in it. "Get off the loop for a while. Go somewhere with bad public transit. Do you have family?" "No." "Find someone whose kitchen you can remember without being asked," she said. "I have to go. There's a meeting where I'll have to say inspection 7 times and look like I mean it." She hung up. I sat with the phone face down and pressed my palm against it until it got warm. The room hummed. The city hummed. I fell asleep in the chair and woke with the imprint of my watch band on my cheek. The murders didn't stop. They slowed. That's me telling you the truth. Slowed is not the same as stopped. The news didn't say the details anymore. It said a similar pattern, and you had to make the connection yourself. They asked for tips. They offered numbers to call if you had information or fear. They gave advice about walking with a buddy and keeping your eyes up and not letting strangers into your building even if they had packages. People nodded and didn't change. I watched door frames. I bought a cheap brush and a can of paint that didn't quite match my building's hallway color, and when I saw a hook mark above a door on my floor, I painted over it. And if someone noticed, they didn't say. I didn't call it heroism. It was a thing my hand could do. Weeks passed, then more. The ring line went back to what it had been for most people. For me, it will never be. Between Northcrest and Weaver, sometimes I see the place where the word was. Not that I can see the absence. I can feel where my eyes want to land and don't. It's like trying to remember a name you've forgotten. It itches. One morning, a month or more after the close, I saw the man with the paperback again. He looked like himself. He looked like everyone who has survived something and doesn't bring it up. He sat and didn't open his book. I sat across from him, and we looked at each other like neighbors. He said, "She asked me about the kitchen again." "Who?" "The woman at Mercy." "It's shut," I said, because that was the line I'd been told to fold and keep in my pocket. "I know," he said. "She wasn't there." It was just me thinking. I asked myself what I kept, like she told me to. I thought, I keep the way the floor tilted near the sink, and I keep the smell of the toaster, and I keep the drawer with the twist ties, and I realized that's enough. I don't need to go down to know that. It doesn't live there. "Good," I said, and meant it like a blessing. He got off at Weaver. He turned left. That's how I know he was okay. You want to know about Marco? I think about him when I pass the school with the glass gym. I think about him when I hear a song he sent me. and I almost forward it to him before my hand remembers what my head knows. I think about him when I see a guy mopping a lobby like it's a stage, and he's about to start his set. I went to his cousin's place like he told me to. I didn't know the address. I found it anyway. Don't ask me how. The cousin was quiet and tall and had the same hands. I told him about the hoodie from 10th grade, and we both laughed, and then we both cried a little, and then we ate the takeout he ordered because he didn't know what else to do with me. I gave him a playlist of songs that slap. He gave me a t-shirt that didn't fit because that's what you do when something doesn't fit. As for the woman in the black coat, I saw her one more time. It was early, not quite day, on the street by Weaver. She was coming up from a service door with a group of people built like people who move machines. She looked thinner. Her hair was shorter, like she'd cut it herself in a mirror that steamed up. We looked at each other and didn't wave. When she passed, she said, "You're doing okay?" Under her breath, like a doctor telling you the wound will heal if you leave it alone. I said, "Are you?" And she smiled with one corner of her mouth and said, "We'll see." And then she was with her people, and I lost her in the bus exhaust in the burn of morning. I don't ride the first car. I don't stand by the doors. I don't put my phone to the glass unless I want to see myself, which I never do. Sometimes the train slows, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the air gets that held breath quality, and then lets go, and you can feel the whole car decide together to be relieved. Sometimes kids press their faces to the window and squeal, and their parents say don't, and the kids ignore them because that's their job. The legend keeps moving. It's what legends do. Every few weeks there's a new post somewhere, a picture of tiles and a caption that says, "Is this it?" And the comments below where people argue about fakes and filters and fear. Someone goes viral for a day with a story about seeing a woman with blunt cut hair in the reflection of a train window, and the story makes you shiver a little, and then you scroll. A guy on a podcast says that the murders were always about a cult under the city that feeds the trains with blood, and 10,000 people listen to him on their commute and nod and don't bother to find out where he lives. I don't correct them. I don't post. I carry a small brush and a small can of paint in my backpack. I look up at door frames when I go into buildings I don't know. When I see hook marks, I cover them. When I don't, I go inside and talk to whoever I came to see. And then I leave and go home and make spaghetti and eat it standing up. Because sitting down with a plate these days sometimes feels like inviting something to join me. Twice, I saw my neighbor. Once on the far side of a crosswalk, his hands in his jacket, watching the light like it owed him money. Once in the reflection of a shop window, my shape with a different set to the shoulders, a different angle to the jaw. Both times I didn't follow. Both times I didn't turn away fast. I let him be there, and then he wasn't. Before you ask, yes, I still hear counting when the city goes quiet in a particular way. Not every night, not even most nights, but when the weather is heavy, and the river is full, and the trains are running a regular schedule, and the people are doing their strange, beloved people things. I can hear it, low and far, the way you can hear the ocean if you grew up by it, and now you live in a place where the air tastes like stone. It doesn't scare me like it did. I don't take comfort from it either. It's just there, a fact like any other. A month ago, on a Saturday morning, I sat on a bench on the Ring Line platform with a paper cup of bad tea. A kid on the next bench over asked his dad if the train went in a circle or a circle with a bump. The dad said, "Circle with a bump." And the kid said, "Cool," like he'd been given a gift. I smiled without meaning to. The train slid in. I got on and stood in the middle. Between Northcrest and Weaver, the lights dipped. They do that sometimes. I looked, because I always will. There was the platform with no name. There was the bench. There was the glass case. There was the maintenance door with its bright new lock. And there, near the bench, was a small square missing from the tile, exactly the size of the one I noticed on the day I stepped off. Someone had pried it up again. Maybe not someone. Maybe the tile had never been put back right and time took it. Either way, the hole looked like a missing tooth in a mouth that doesn't smile. It looked like an invitation if you are the kind of person who thinks every hole is for your hand. I didn't step off. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't send a message. I didn't call the woman in the black coat. I looked at the hole long enough to feel the itch. And then I looked at the ad about insurance and the gum moons on the floor and the reflection of a boy's yellow jacket in the window. I breathed. I kept my time. I let the doors decide themselves. Back at street level, I bought a sandwich from the place where the woman used to call me boss. The new guy calls me man, and I told him my name twice, and he still calls me man, and that's fine. On my way out, I stopped by the door and ran my fingers over the frame. No hook mark. I walked 2 blocks and checked the door to the pawn shop with the neon clock. A faint scratch. I put my brush on it and painted over it with the wrong color that was close enough. It covered. If anyone asked, I was the handyman filling a scuff. No one asked. People are busy. People are trying to get home. I don't know if you want a lesson. I don't have one. Don't get off between stations if the doors open where there's no name. If you do, don't let the doors shut. If you can't help looking, try counting something human while you do it. The number of breaths you take before the next stop. The number of people with yellow shoes. The number of times you want to tell someone a story and don't. If you see a mark above a door that looks like a hook, paint it. Don't photograph it. Don't share it. Not everything needs your camera. Some things need your brush. If you hear a woman in a black coat tell you not to look, she's right. If you see a man who looks like you, and he calls himself your neighbor, he probably is, in the worst way. If you think you can fix the city by yourself, you can't. If you think you can keep your hands clean while you live here, you can't do that either. Do the small things. That's what we have. Sometimes I take the long way to the station. Sometimes I stand at the rail over the river and try to guess how fast it's running by how the light moves. Sometimes I go 2 stops past Weaver on purpose and get off and walk back, because I like the way it feels to come up from underground and see the light fill in the space between buildings. Sometimes I think I see Marco in a crowd, and I don't chase him, and I don't wave. I let the shape be that shape and I let it go. Sometimes at night I wake up with music in my head, and I reach for my phone to send him the song, and then I put the phone down, and I listen to the silence, which isn't, and I count until the count runs out. A week ago I found the map again, not the one I tore up, not a copy of that copy. A different map slid under my door like a flyer for a pizza place. The lines were right. The stations were there. Mercy was not. In its place was a blank tile where a name should be. a little square with no letters, and next to it, drawn in pencil, a curve like a hook. No text, no signature. I took a brush. I dipped it in paint. I went to the door of my apartment and I painted over the hook on the paper. It bled a little and then it covered. I folded the paper and put it in a drawer with my lease and a pair of keys from a place I don't live anymore. I'm telling you this because you want to know how it ends. It doesn't. It just changes shape. You hold it. You let it go. You ride. You walk. You keep your eyes where they do the least harm and the most good. If you're lucky, you have a kitchen to remember. And if you ever see a hook above your door, you know what to do.